I learned who truly owned what and who wanted to sell. It was slow, deliberate, and solitary. But it fed something in me, something I had buried under decades of being the helper. The more I read, the more I realized the designer Mirella adored was looking for fresh capital, quietly. The brand was faltering in the shadows, even as the public face sparkled. That was when the idea began, not revenge, not anger, just reclamation. For every favor I gave, for every time I stood in the back, for every broken button no one cared to notice, I began saving aggressively. I sold my car, moved into a smaller unit, picked up 2 more alteration clients. Every dollar had a name. I did not tell anyone. I just kept working. Every stitched seam became a prayer. Every tightened hem, a quiet vow. One day, Mirella posted a new video. She stood in a boutique mirror, holding a glass of champagne. Her caption read, "Prepping something magical with my fave designer again. Dreams really do come true." I smiled, because by then, I had already scheduled a call. Not with her, but with the founder's former partner. And I did not need champagne. I needed signatures. She joked that I got the leftovers, but she forgot I was the one who learned how to turn scraps into substance. And soon, I would not just fix dresses, ... I would decide who wore them. The public dismissal came 3 weeks after her brunch. Mirella was invited to speak at a fashion panel hosted by a luxury branding agency. It was a curated event, roses spiraled from centerpieces, and the chairs were wrapped in velvet. She wore ivory again. I watched the livestream from my apartment, with thread between my fingers and a silence I did not recognize in myself. They introduced her as a style muse, someone who understood elegance on a cellular level. I remembered when she used to borrow my skirts and safety pin the waist smaller. During the Q&A, a young woman in the crowd asked about style inspirations. Mirella smiled and said, "Honestly, I have always had a natural sense of fashion. Some people grow up with it, some ... learn by trial and error. Like my sister, she is more of a fixer. Really sweet, but ... you know." The audience laughed. Even the moderator chuckled. And Mirella went on. She described a moment at her wedding, when someone's dress literally fell apart mid-toast, and said it taught her the importance of tailoring. She never said my name, but I felt named all the same. And that was the moment I knew the story she told the world had no room for me. I had spent my entire life covering tears and smoothing seams. Now she used those memories as metaphors for her rise. I turned off the live stream, I put away my needle, and I opened the folder I had been building in secret documents. Proposals, investor memos, ... I was not going to correct her. I was going to replace her. In the weeks that followed, Mirella's face began appearing everywhere. The designer she adored was building a new campaign, Women Who Defined Modern Elegance, and she was rumored to be the face of it. The press ran glowing headlines. Influencer bride to star an iconic brand relaunch. The new era of fashion. Inside the studio with Mirella. My inbox, meanwhile, began to fill with quiet confirmations. The creative director, woman named Sylvie, was intrigued by my proposal. We arranged a call. I introduced myself under my middle name, Elisa, cleaner, simpler, forgettable. I pitched an investment offer, not just financial, but narrative. I told her elegance needed roots. That legacy meant nothing if it only looked upward, never back. She listened. And when the numbers aligned, she agreed. I signed the first set of documents that week. Not ownership, not yet, but something better. Power that watched from the sidelines. Influence with a silencer. Mirella, meanwhile, posted a video from inside the studio. She turned in circles while seamstresses adjusted the bodice of a new gown. She grinned into the camera, captioning it, "So honored to be part of something timeless. This brand is a dream." I saved the post, because soon that dream would belong to me. But I said nothing. I kept sewing, smiling, showing up for Mama's checkups and paying bills she would never remember. I let Mirella shine. I let the light blind her. And slowly, people began to forget there was ever another sister. One day, while helping a longtime customer at the tailor shop, I saw a glossy magazine slide across the counter. Mirella's face was on the cover. Head tilted, pearls at her neck, eyes glazed with ambition. The headline read, "From small town to style crown, Mirella's reign begins." Inside, there was a 2-page spread. In it, she claimed she had rebuilt her identity from nothing, said she came from humble roots, but taught herself how to sparkle. I read it once, then again. I waited for my name, but it never came. Even history, it seemed, could be hemmed to fit her frame. That night, I sat with Mama during dinner. She no longer remembered that Morella had gotten married. She asked if school was going well. I smiled and said yes. Then she noticed the magazine on the table. She held it up and squinted. "She looks like your cousin," she said. I nodded. "She used to play dress up in my shoes. And then Mama said something I did not expect. But you were always the one who cleaned them." I laughed, but it ached because she was right. I had always been the one who kept things whole, and I had never once been asked what I wanted to wear. She told the world a story where I was invisible. But the world was about to see who really held the thread, because soon I would not be in the background of her dream. I would be the signature dot. There is a moment in every life, quiet, unmarked, unspectacular, when something breaks for good. Not loudly, not with a slam or a scream. Just ... breaks, a hairline fracture in the soul that finally splits. Mine came. On a Tuesday, I had taken a late train back from the garment district, carrying a tote full of altered coats. The train car was nearly empty, save for a sleeping man and a teenager scrolling through her phone. My feet ached. I had not eaten since noon. And then my phone buzzed. It was a group text. From Morella, she had launched a private line of bridal accessories, veils, gloves, and miniature perfumes. The message was a press kit draft sent to friends and close collaborators. She called the line Morella Grace. And beneath the photo of her holding lace gloves stitched with tiny seed pearls, the tagline read, "Inspired by the women who raised me to dream." There was no mention of me, even in the fine print. I read it 3 times. Then I looked at my hands, hands that had carried her through childhood, hands that had stitched her pageant dresses, packed her moving boxes, paid deposits, scrubbed floors, folded grief into dinners, and all I could think was, she has erased me. I did not cry. There were no tears left, just a raw, aching stillness. When I got home, I poured tea and sat beside Mama, who was humming to herself. She no longer recognized most faces in photos, but she still remembered the smell of my rosemary tea. I held her hand. Her fingers trembled. That night, I lay awake until morning, the shadows curling across the ceiling like thread unraveling. I thought about every moment I had said yes, when I wanted to say no. Every time I had stepped back so she could step forward. Every gift I had given unacknowledged, undocumented, unremembered. And I decided something: I would never give her another thing. Not my silence, not my presence, not even my absence. From that moment on, I stopped returning her messages. I muted the group chat. I stopped explaining myself. 2 people who already believed I was small. I did not argue. I did not defend. I simply detached quietly, cleanly, like the final cut of a silk ribbon. In the weeks that followed, Morella announced a gala partnership, a fashion charity event where she would unveil a new capsule piece in collaboration with the same designer she had long worshipped. It was to be a televised affair, with interviews, photographers, brand sponsors. She posted photos of the fittings, the sketches, the mood boards. I watched them all and I said nothing. Because behind every dress she touched, now behind every sketch, and every email and every stitch sewn in, that glamorous studio ... was my signature. The business had not changed names, but the shares had, quietly, gradually, and legally, I had acquired controlling interest. Not for revenge, not for attention, but for peace, for permanence, for the part of me that had always been made to vanish, even in rooms I built with my own hands. One evening, Sylvie, the creative director, called me. She wanted final approval on a design element for the gala piece, a pearl cluster on the shoulder, inspired by one of Morella's wedding accessories. I laughed softly and told her to make one change. Replace the pearl cluster with a single carved button. White, smooth, and hollow in the center. She paused. My name is Elira. I am 32 years old. They laughed when a pearl button popped off my dress in the middle of my sister's wedding toast, right in front of her couture guests and rented photographers. I had loaned her the down payment for that banquet hall, but I stayed quiet, holding the button in my hand like a secret. The next morning, I called the fashion house that made her dress. 3 weeks later, I owned it. Before we continue, I'd love to know where are you watching from today? Comment below. I grew up in the quiet end of a loud city, the side with clotheslines instead of dry cleaning, and front steps that doubled as therapy chairs. My mother worked nights at a senior care facility, and my sister Morella and I learned early how to listen for her key in the door. I was the older one, but sometimes it felt like I was born just to keep her safe from the time she could speak. Morella had a voice people leaned toward. She was the kind of beautiful that made strangers linger. I was sturdy, useful. When our school needed volunteers, I signed up. When our fridge was half empty, I skipped seconds. Marilla always got her plate first. That was never questioned. We shared a room. Her side was lavender-scented lotion and glossy magazine clippings. Mine was thread kits, hand-me-down textbooks, and a small notebook where I practiced different versions of our last name just in case I ever owned something worth branding. I got my first job at 14. Marilla got her first bouquet at 15. She was chosen, I was depended on, and I did not resent her. Not then. After high school, she wanted to go out of state for college. I helped her pack. I gave her the last of my savings to cover her deposit. She cried, said I was a real one. Then she left. I stayed. Someone had to keep the lights on for Mama, whose memory was beginning to fray like an old ribbon. Over the next few years, I became good at the small things, managing the medication chart, knowing which bills could wait. I worked at a tailoring shop by day and a call center by night. My breaks were spent comparing fabric textures in donated catalogs. My joys were small: a working zipper, a compliment from a customer, a week where the rent cleared without stress. Marilla came home less and less, but when she did, she was glossy and gold. Always talking about someone's brand launch or destination shoot. Her world had softened while mine got rougher. Still, I pressed her dresses before every visit, made sure she looked perfect for Mother, who by then could only remember fragments, mostly Marilla's childhood smile. Never mind. One winter, I gave her the money to put down on her first apartment. She called me an angel, but she never paid it back. I never asked. Giving had become my identity. It made me feel needed, even if invisible. So when she announced her engagement to a man whose last name sounded like a bank, I clapped first. I offered to help with the wedding planning. She said it was taken care of. The tone was sweet, but final. A few weeks later, the invitation came in a cream envelope with gold trim. No +1. A note inside read, "Please wear neutrals. We want the photos to feel clean and timeless." I stared at that sentence for a long time. I found a beige dress on clearance. The hem was uneven, the sleeves a little too short, but I altered it myself. I added a brooch from our mother's old jewelry box. It had a single pearl in the center, slightly cracked, but still lovely. I remember fastening it like it was armor. On the wedding day, I arrived early. No one greeted me. I found my name on a folded card at a back table near the kitchen entrance. Marilla's college friend sat near the front, all cream chiffon and silver heels. I smiled anyway. I always smiled. When Marilla walked in, the entire hall inhaled. Her dress shimmered like champagne in crystal light. The designer's name was whispered like a prayer. I recognized it, a couture label I had only ever seen in editorials. Her fiancé beamed like he had acquired not a bride, but a crown. And I clapped. I meant it. But near the end of dinner, as I leaned to pass a napkin to the elderly woman beside me, I heard it a soft, dry pop. One of the pearl buttons on my dress had come loose. It hit the floor and rolled under the table. A child retrieved it and handed it to me with sticky fingers. I took it gently, smiled, said thank you. When I looked up, Marilla's gaze was already on me. She smirked just slightly. Then she whispered something to the bridesmaid beside her. They both laughed, and so did her fiancé. It was not cruel. Not loud, but it was enough. Enough to tell me I was not one of them. Enough to remind me that no matter what I had done, how many nights I stayed up sewing hymns or sending money orders, I was still the girl with the loose button in the back. No one asked if I was all right, no. One saw me slip the button into my palm like a secret. No one noticed when I stopped speaking. That night, I walked out alone. No goodbye. No photos, no last dance. The streets were cold and the hem of my dress caught on the curb. I kept walking, my fingers wrapped tight around that little broken button, and something hardened in me, something silent, something that could not be stitched back. She had her gown, her guests, and her stage. I had a broken button, and the memory of every favor she forgot. But soon, she would learn I was not just good with fabric. I was good with foundations. After the wedding, something shifted. Not just in me, but around me. The calls from Marilla slowed even more, as if my quiet exit had confirmed something for her. She sent no thank you note, no picture, not even a forwarded photo from the family group chat. When I called to check on our mother's appointments, Marilla's assistant answered. She had an assistant now. That spring, she started posting videos from inside penthouses and floral-strewn dressing rooms. Hashtags like #couture life and #bridal royalty trailed behind her captions. One reel stood out. She twirled in the same wedding gown, on loan again for a bridal feature, still dreaming about this masterpiece. She wrote, tagging the designer's official account. I clicked the tag. The name was embossed in silver. The brand was legacy-level, European, exclusive, nearly mythical. Dresses that took 6 months and a small fortune to produce. I recognized the founder's bio, a designer known for elevating women who already glow. I stared at the screen. Then I looked down at my lap. A needle was still in my hand from altering one of Mama's cardigans. The contrast was almost poetic. She was tagging gowns designed for royalty while I was restitching a button on a sleeve worn thin from memory loss. But I did not feel jealousy. I felt curiosity. I wanted to know how things like that worked. Who made those dresses? Who funded the designs? Who chose which women glowed? A few weeks later, Morella hosted a brunch. The invitation came via text, unsigned. Hope you can make it. Just casual influencer girls coming. Wear something fresh. I went, not for her, but for proof. Proof that I was not imagining the distance. That the old warmth I carried in, my memories really had turned cold. She greeted me with air kisses, introduced me as my sister who does, crafty stuff. The room chuckled. I nodded. Placed a container of lemon muffins on the counter, ones I had baked from scratch, and sat near the end of the table. Midway through the brunch, one of her friends leaned across and asked, "So what do you do?" Again. Before I could answer, Morella chimed in. She is kind of like a fixer. You know, when you rip a hem or stain a sleeve. They laughed again. That was the moment I heard it. The line that cracked something deep. She got the room. I got the leftovers. She said it lightly, as a joke. But it echoed because it was not a joke to me. It was a confession. Morella had always gotten the room. The praise, the spotlight, the invitations with gold ink. I had gotten the scraps, the thankless tasks, the quiet duty of being useful but unseen. And now she was naming it with a smirk, like it was something to be proud of. The brunch continued. No one noticed when I stepped outside to call a ride chair. No one asked why I left early. The muffins remained untouched. That night, I opened my notebook. The same one from childhood. The one I used to sketch imaginary clothing labels. Logos that never saw daylight. I began writing again. Not dreams, this time.details.names.timelines.investments. I researched the designer whose name my sister could not stop dropping. I found articles, archives, company filings. I read interviews with investors and former board members. I followed fashion development funds and textile sourcing chains. Every night after work, I studied like a student without a school. Her smile faltered. I heard it, the shift. People whispering, editors scribbling, photographers angling their lenses. Toward me now. Sylvie turned to the crowd. She spoke with grace, with precision. Tonight, we celebrate not just the beauty of design, but the power behind it, the women who work quietly, persistently, unseen. The women who do not ask to be chosen because they have already built the path themselves. There was a moment of stunned silence. Then came the applause, slow at first, then growing. Morella still stood in the center of the runway, her arms once graceful, now stiff. Her eyes darted to the cameras, to Sylvie, to me. She understood. This was not her coronation, it was my reveal. She had worn the story, but I had written it. And now the world knew. No press release could change it. No caption could spin it. Because truth, when finally dressed, needs no veil. I sat back down. The crowd continued clapping, but this time the applause faced a different direction. She walked the runway expecting a crown, but what she received was clarity. Because that night, everyone turned not to the dress, but to the hand that stitched it. The silence after the applause was heavier than the noise itself. Morella stepped off the runway slowly, the hem of the dress brushing the floor as though it no longer knew how to float. A stylist whispered something to her, but she did not respond. Her eyes never left me. I did not flinch. I had no reason to. I remained seated, my hand resting gently on Mama's. She smiled, unaware of the shift. Her memory caught in an earlier year one where I still braided Morella's hair and tucked her into bed. Backstage, Morella was supposed to meet with the press. There was a lineup interviews, red carpet shots, social posts already drafted, but the schedule fell apart. Whispers spread before she could say a word. One photographer lowered his lens and walked away. Mid-frame. The fashion world had smelled something richer than scandal. Power. And power changes. Direction fast. I did not chase her. I did not go backstage. I left the gala with Mama by my side. Slowly, wheeling her down a hallway lined with portraits of past collections, every frame hung slightly higher than the last, as if the history was trying to rise toward something better. Outside, the air was cool. A car waited. The driver opened the door with a nod. I helped Mama in before stepping in myself. I turned once and looked back. She was there, Morella. Still inside the glass doors. Still in the gown, but smaller now. A silhouette framed by light she could no longer control. The next morning, I awoke to a dozen messages. From stylists, journalists, even one of Morella's former brand collaborators. They all asked the same question, just dressed in different tones. Was it true? Had I always been involved? I answered none of them. I let the silence grow, because sometimes silence speaks louder than any announcement. Later that week, the studio scheduled a post-gala brunch. Private, intimate, exclusive. This was where future campaigns would be discussed. New ambassadors considered. Morella was on the guest list, of course so was I, but this time, the card bore my full name, not scribbled in as a courtesy. Not added, last-minute. Printed. Embossed. Centered. When I arrived. The room stilled. No flashbulbs. No laughter. Just the weight of realization falling over crystal glass. Morella arrived. 20 minutes late. She wore beige. Her smile flickered the moment. She saw me seated at the head of the table, but she sat anyway. Were no seats left at the far end. For the first time, Morella had to sit at my table. Not as the guest of honor, but as a participant. Sylvie began the meeting. Her voice warm but focused. She welcomed new investors, introduced creative leads, and then, without fanfare, deferred to me. Would you like to say a few words? She asked. I looked at Morella, then back to the room, and said simply, we will build something enduring. Not loud, not shallow, just lasting. The table nodded. Morella blinked. She had no seat to shift to, no spotlight to grab. Because the light had already moved and she could not chase what she once ignored. She thought the story paused at the runway. But I was just setting the table. And now, she would have to eat from the plate she once left empty for me 2 weeks later. The studio hosted a private unveiling. No red carpet, no influencers. Just a curated guest list of editors, fashion historians, and long-standing patrons. The space was quiet, candlelit, and intentionally stripped of glamour, the kind of event where legacy speaks for itself. Morella arrived early, draped in gold. Her heels clicked across the marble like punctuation. She greeted Sylvie with a kiss on both cheeks. She brushed past me without a glance. I expected that she was still playing a role that no longer existed. The evening opened with wine and soft piano. People mingled between mannequins dressed in archival pieces, gowns from decades past, resurrected from storage. In the center of the room stood one final mannequin, draped in a black cloth. Unlabeled. Untouched. I waited. Let them wander. Let them wonder. When Sylvie stepped forward to speak, the room quieted immediately. She introduced the night as a moment of restoration, not of old trends, but of values long overlooked. Then she nodded toward me. I walked to the center. The mannequin stood in silence. I did not clear my throat. I did not smile. I simply began. This piece is not about fashion. It is about the hands that held it. The silence behind the stitches. The women who never asked to be thanked and were forgotten anyway. I reached forward and lifted the black cloth. Gasps fluttered through the room. The dress was simple. Matte ivory, no sparkle, no distraction. Just perfect lines and precise construction. At the collar, one single pearl button. Umpolished. Bare. It gleamed like a held-back tear. This dress, I continued, was inspired by a moment I thought I would never speak about. A moment where I was laughed at for a dress I altered myself. A moment that tried to reduce me to a punchline. I looked up then, not at the crowd, but at Morella. She froze her hands, clutched her bag too tightly. I went on, this is not revenge. This is reclamation. Because sometimes the most elegant thing a woman can do is remain silent long enough for the world to hear her truth. Sylvie stepped beside me and placed something on the podium, a framed letter, an original design sketch with 2 signatures, hers and mine. The crowd applauded, not in a frenzy, but in that reverent, reverberating way reserved for something earned. Morella did not clap, but she did not leave either, because leaving would have been an admission, and she was not ready to tell the truth, so she stood there, in her golden gown, watching the applause shift from her to me, like a tide. She could no longer control. And then it happened. One of the editors stood up and said we should have known. The simplicity, the detail. This was not Morella's eye. This was deeper. Another chimed in, this is the kind of design you cannot fake. You either live it or you do not. They did not say her name, but they did not have to. She turned to leave then, quietly, heels softer now. But before she reached the door, one of the interns stepped forward and offered her a brochure for your sister's collection. She said kindly. Morella took it with trembling fingers. I remained still. That was all I had come for. Not to gloat, not to punish, but to finally be seen not as the shadow behind the beauty, but as the light that shaped it. Have you ever seen someone underestimate the wrong person? Tell us your story in the comments. She walked in believing it was her curtain call, but the lights had already shifted, and the final applause was not meant for the dress, but for the woman who never stopped sewing the day after the unveiling. The silence from Morella was louder than any tantrum. No calls, no messages, just a single unfollow on social media, her quiet attempt at control, even as the world rebalanced itself. Then said, understood. When I ended the call, I opened the drawer beside my bed. The pearl button from my ruined wedding dress still sat there, round, chipped and firm between my fingers. This time, it did not feel like failure. It felt like prophecy. Because the girl with the broken dress, was now the woman who signed the checks. What would you have done in her place? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop them in the comments. She erased me from her story, but she forgot I had written the ending. And she would read it on the runway. From the outside, I looked peaceful. I still showed up to work. I still pushed Mama's wheelchair through the park when the weather allowed. I still smiled at the barista who remembered I took my tea without sugar. I laughed softly when someone mentioned Morella's gala in passing, just enough to seem proud, but not enough to seem invested. Inside, I was quieter than ever, not with sadness. With calculation, I no longer reached for approval. I no longer flinched when my name was excluded from headlines or dinner tables. The world had always offered Morella spotlights. I had learned how to move in silence, and silence, I was learning, has weight. The gala drew closer. It became the talk of every bridal circle. Articles ran teaser images, a white gown with a low back and hand-bedded detailing, inspired by Morella's bridal journey. She called it Grace Reborn. I recognized the silhouette. It was a draft sketch. I had sent Sylvie during our first call a design concept I once drew in my high school notebook. Morella would never know. That week, she emailed me for the first time in months. The subject line read, "You should come to the gala." Smiley face, no greeting, no apology. Just a request wrapped in assumption. I did not reply. But I printed the email, folded it once, tucked it beside the pearl button in my nightstand drawer. I began preparing in my own way, quietly, legally, powerfully. I met with brand lawyers, confirmed my shareholdings, reviewed the press materials. I finalized a list of guests to be moved, redirected, or reseated. I did not need attention. I needed precision. Morella continued to post daily stories, captions that read like declarations. She who dares wears couture. Built, not born. Sometimes your name is your ticket. I wondered what ticket she thought she held, because the name she leaned on was no longer hers. It belonged to the one she had forgotten. Days before the gala, Sylvie requested a final meeting. She wanted to walk me through the event order. We met in a small suite above the design studio. She brought coffee. I brought silence. She handed me a folder, the final LOOK, BOOK, at the very end. There it was, the last dress, the one Morella would wear to close the show. White silk, one shoulder, simple train, and at the collar, a single pearl button. No embellishment, no cluster. Just one, like a whisper stitched in fabric. Do you approve? Sylvie asked. I nodded. Then opened my purse and placed something in her hand. The original. The button from my wedding dress. She understood. No words passed between us. Later that night, Morella posted a video from inside a limousine. She was sipping champagne, gushing about legacy, and toasting the most important night of my life. And I, across town, sat at my kitchen table with my tea and a single candle burning. The world saw her rising, but I had already arrived. She raised her glass to the night she thought was hers. But she did not know. The stage she would walk on now bore my name. Thread by thread, stitch by stitch, the day before the gala, the city felt like it was holding its breath. The designer's headquarters was draped in ivory silks. The street blocked off for guests. The press already assembling near the entrance. Marella posted a countdown clock on her story with the words, "Tomorrow I become history." But history, I had learned, is not written by the one in the dress, it is written by the one holding the pen. That morning, I received a call from Sylvie. Her voice was calm, almost reverent. "The paperwork is finalized," she said. "You now own 51%. I said nothing at first, then I simply replied, "Thank you." It did not feel like a victory march. It felt like truth correcting itself. For 2 decades, I had lived in the shadow of a name I helped build, a family I held up with hands that never shook, even when exhausted, unseen, or belittled. Now, quietly, I had stepped out of that shadow. Without a sound, that evening, I received a guest list preview for the gala. Marella was seated center stage. Naturally, Mama had been placed 4 rows back, marked as extended family. I made one call. Her seat was moved to the front, right beside mine. Later that night, I went to Mama's room and helped her pick out a shawl. She no longer understood where we were going. She only asked if it would be cold. "No," I told her. "It will be warm inside." I packed the pearl button in a velvet pouch, not to show, just to carry. It had become more than an object. It was a reminder of where I had started, of what had broken, and of who had survived as the sun set. I stood before the mirror in my room. I wore black silk, not because it was fashionable, but because it was quiet, unassuming, the kind of elegance no one needed to announce. I pinned a brooch on my lapel, one Mama had given me long ago. She smiled when she saw it, though I do not know if she remembered why. On the ride to the gala, I stayed silent. Not because I had nothing to say, but because silence was my armor now. Marella had always filled space with words, declarations, laughter that stretched across rooms. But I had learned to speak in presence, and presence, when earned, does not need a microphone at the venue. Flashes erupted as soon as we stepped out. But the cameras were not pointed at us. Not yet. Inside, everything gleamed. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, a scent like roses, and ambition. Marella stood beneath a banner bearing the designer's name, speaking to a small circle of editors. Her gown shimmered, her teeth gleamed. Her confidence filled the air like perfume, and I walked right past her. Unnoticed, my hand lightly resting on Mama's shoulder, we were ushered to our seats, front row. No one questioned it. I watched Marella approach the runway entrance, clutching the final gown of the night, the one with the pearl button. She smiled at the cameras, as if the evening belonged to her. And in a way, it did, but not in the way she believed. Because in that moment, I understood something Marella never would. Legacy is not what you wear, it is what you build. And I had built everything she now stood inside. Sylvie passed behind me just before the show began. She placed a hand on my shoulder, brief, quiet, solid. That was the moment. I knew the shift had already happened. Ownership is not a crown, it is a key. And I had opened the door she thought belonged to her alone. She wore the dress she stood in, the light, but the foundation beneath her heels, that was mine. Every inch of it. The lights dimmed. The music began, a low cinematic hum that grew with every step echoing down the runway. The crowd leaned forward, waiting for the final look, the closing spectacle. The voiceover introduced the last model, a vision of grace, born of legacy. The heart of this season's rebirth. Marella stepped onto the runway, and the room exhaled. She looked radiant. She knew it. Her chin lifted slightly, her arms glided effortlessly. The fabric flowed behind her like a vow. The gown was minimalist, perfectly structured. A single pearl button sat at the collar, gleaming like a tear that refused to fall. Marella reached the center of the runway. Cameras flashed, phones rose. Guests clapped, then the music slowed, and Sylvie stepped forward. She held a small envelope in her hands, gold embossed with the brand's seal. The press assumed it was a thank you to Marella, perhaps a formal partnership announcement. Marella smiled and extended her hand, but Sylvie walked past her. She stopped in front of me and handed me the envelope. The cameras turned, the applause slowed. I rose, not quickly, not dramatically, just enough to be seen, just enough to be counted. I opened the envelope and unfolded the card. It read, "To our new majority owner, thank you for rebuilding our house. Stitch by Silent Stitch." I looked up. Marella had not moved. I did not react. I had no need to. Because that morning, the fashion blogs wrote a new headline. The sister behind the thread, Elira unveiled as majority owner of Maison Sylvie. The article went viral, but it was not my name trending. It was the quote Sylvie gave in the press release. "Some women build in silence. until the silence becomes the brand. By noon, requests flooded in interviews. Profiles, cover features, I declined them all. I had said what I came to say. The rest was already stitched into fabric. Back at the studio, things shifted. Seamstresses who once worked quietly now greeted me with gentle smiles. Interns nodded with quiet reverence. Even the board, once indifferent, now leaned in when I entered a room. Not because I had raised my voice, but because they had finally heard it. Morella, meanwhile, tried to reclaim space. She posted a series of nostalgic pictures, her in old dresses, her in childhood skirts. The captions were vague nods to humble beginnings and family bonds. The comments, however, told a different story. Is this your sister's design? Was this from the collection Elira sketched? Why did you never mention her before? And beneath those silence, she could not answer without revealing the truth. And the truth was now public. 2 weeks later, an exclusive piece ran in Haute Lineage, the most respected fashion quarterly. It was not about Morella. It was about craftsmanship, about the legacy of forgotten women in design history. The final paragraph named May. Not as a relative, not as an assistant, but as an architect. That same afternoon, Morella's collaboration contract was quietly dissolved. There was no announcement, no drama, just a quiet update to the brand's website. Her image was gone, her title removed. Her emails to the studio went unanswered. She sent a message to Sylvie, then to me. Can we talk? I left it unread. I was no longer available for explanations. That door had closed with the click of a pearl button. Mama never noticed the shift. She still hummed the same tune during her sponge baths. Still asked when Morella would visit. I told her she was busy, that she was well. Some truths are best left folded. At the studio, we framed the gala dress, not for sale, not for show, just to hang in the lobby behind glass. At the collar, beneath the pearl button, we engraved a plaque for the quiet builders, the unseen hands, the thread behind the name, and that was enough. I did not need revenge. I did not need her apology, because the world now saw what I had always known. I was not the one who clung to legacy. I was the one who created it. She tried to reframe the story, but the story no longer belonged to her, and I no longer needed to speak. My work was doing the talking. Some losses echo louder when they are not named. Morella did not rage, did not cry publicly, did not spiral the way people do in stories. She simply disappeared, post by post, appearance by appearance. She faded from the spaces she once owned, like light retreating behind curtains. And I let her, not with bitterness, with grace, because I had no use for spectacle. The war had never been loud. It was fought in silence, and I had won by refusing to shout. Weeks passed, the studio flourished. Orders doubled. Clients came not just for gowns, but for what they represented, elegance that came from endurance. Quiet power, women who stitched instead of screamed. My name was now whispered in meetings where it had never been spoken. One afternoon, I returned to Mama's house with groceries. I found a small envelope wedged between the door and frame. No return address, just my name. Handwritten. Inside was a card. Plain. No message. Just a pressed flower from Morella's wedding bouquet, and a single photograph. One I had never seen. It was from the wedding rehearsal dinner. I was in the background, holding Morella's dress as she fixed her hair. She had cropped out everyone else. But not me. I stared at the image for a long time, then I placed it in a drawer and closed it gently. Some apologies are wordless, but they still leave a mark. That weekend, I returned to the tailor shop where I first learned how to hem sleeves. The sign was faded. The bell on the door still chimed like a memory. I asked to rent the back room. Not to sew. To teach. I started offering free weekend classes to girls who could not afford fashion school, girls with ideas and calloused fingers. With dreams no one applauded. They came quietly at first. Then steadily, one girl brought her grandmother's shawl and asked if we could turn it into a modern wrap. We did. Another girl wanted to learn how to make pockets. Look elegant, she learned in 2 weeks. Each student was a reminder, not of what I had lost, but of what I had built. I returned home each evening to Mama humming old lullabies. She no longer asked about Morella. She sometimes forgot my name. But when I handed her tea in the floral mug she liked, she always said thank you. And that was enough. One night, I pulled the pearl button from its drawer. I placed it in a shadow box beside my first set of studio keys. Then I hung it in my hallway, not as a trophy. As a testimony. because every broken thing I had once hidden had led me here to a life stitched by hand. Lined with memory, fastened with truth, she faded without a fight, but I was not looking for a final blow. I was building a beginning, one thread at a time. Sometimes I wake up and forget who I used to be. Not because I have erased her, but because I have finally forgiven her. The woman who stayed too long at quiet tables, who folded herself to fit into smaller lives, who thought giving more would make her seen. That woman taught me everything, and I thank her every morning. My life now is not loud. It does not glitter. It hums like a well-wound bobbin, steady, consistent, ready. The studio runs without fuss. We create pieces meant to be worn and remembered, not flaunted and forgotten. Our gowns carry initials stitched into the lining, not mine. There's the women who wear them. Because I know how it feels to be left nameless. I sit on panels now. I mentor, I speak softly and sign slowly, making sure the contracts mean something. I look people in the eye when I say no, not with anger, with certainty. Sometimes people ask about Morella. I tell them what is true. She taught me the difference between shine and substance. They nod like they understand, but I do not think they really do. Only a few people know what it means to be erased by someone you love. Fewer still know what it means to forgive them, without inviting them back in. The last time I saw her, she was across the street from the studio. She did not walk in. She just stood there, watching the sign. Hands tucked into her coat. We locked eyes for a second, and then she turned away. That was enough. We were never going to be the kind of sisters who braided each other's hair again. But we had both stopped pretending. And there is freedom in that, Mama. Passed a few months later, peacefully, in her sleep. She called me baby before drifting off, the one name that needed no memory at the memorial. Morella stood in the back. She wore black. No camera crew, no statements, just stillness. I nodded to her once, she nodded back, and that was all. Closure, I have learned, is not always an event. Sometimes it is just a quiet understanding between two people who remember things differently and have stopped trying to rewrite them. Now, when I walk through the studio, I carry no bitterness, only presence, and the kind of peace that can only be stitched from silence. If you've ever had to walk away from family for your own peace, know this: you're not alone. Share your story below. She left with silence, and I stayed with grace. Because I did not need an apology to remember who I am. Thank you for walking this journey with me. If you have ever been laughed at for the way you showed up, for the clothes you wore, the gifts you gave, or the love you offered freely, I want you to remember this: what they mock in the light, they often need in the dark. And one day, when the lights shift, they will see who you truly were the whole time. This story was never about a dress, not really. It was about being erased and choosing not to disappear. About staying soft in a world that rewards spectacle. About learning that dignity does not always shout. Sometimes it just stands. Quiet. Still. Unapologetic. If this story touched something in you, if you have ever carried the weight of someone else's rise while your own knees buckled under silence, I see you. You are not invisible, and your quiet power is not a flaw. It is your foundation. Please consider subscribing to this channel for more stories like this, stories where justice does not scream. It unfolds because we are building a place here, not just for revenge, but for revelation. And if nothing else stays with you, let this final line settle in your chest. Sometimes the button they laugh at becomes the clasp that holds everything together.